So, for our last talk, he's the creator of Trailblazer. That's correct. Trailbreaker. A high-level web architecture solution for Ruby apps. You are not the only one that wants to sleep. He also wrote a book about it on LeanPub. You might have noticed him yesterday being the soul of the party. He's the least German I've ever known, and I've been living in Germany for 2 years now. 3 years, yeah, Munich. So, yeah, it's Munich, you know. There's a lot of Bavarians there. So please welcome on stage Mr. Nick Sutterer. 3 years, come on.
Why is it so bright in this room? Ah, better. It's always a big pleasure to end a 2-day conference and to sit all day in a dark corner trying to cure your hangover because the after party is on the first night and not on the second night. Actually, I think this is a bad excuse from the organizers. So they told me everyone is leaving today. Who is leaving today? It's like 5 people. Okay, I'm sorry. I mean, I'm happy. So you could actually party last night. And I think you partied hard because you didn't have to give the closing presentation on the second day and so on and so on and so on. But I also hear rumors about an unofficial after party tonight. So maybe you want to rebook your flight and stay for a couple of more days? Hey, Raphael, take a seat. Okay, to make this there might be confusion. My name is actually not Božidar. My name is Nick. I'm also not from Bulgaria. I'm from Germany. This does not mean I cannot drink as much rakia as you guys can drink. So it's a bit sad. This lovely guy, actually, I never know how to pronounce his name. I love him to the bottom of my heart. We've been partying at many conferences and having deep and profound debates. Božidar, is that how? Because if you know someone for like a couple of years and at some point you say like, hey, it was nice the last 3 years with you, but how do I actually pronounce your name? It's a bit awkward. So anyway, he's usually a party animal. I'm nothing compared to him. He parties like a maniac. Unfortunately, he is a bit sick today, or also yesterday. He is, I think he's in hospital. It's like not the coolest thing to do on the weekend, but on the other hand, it's a cool story. Like, so, hey, how was Friday? Oh, appendix surgery, nothing special. Oh, cool. Okay. So I think we should send him some message, and like maybe we can all yell into the camera. I don't know, something like Božidar, we miss you, mwah, 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 or something like that. So I'll count to 3, and we all yell this, yeah. So you can also wake up again. So 1, 2, 3. Božidar, we miss you, mwah, mwah, mwah. We don't have time for applause. I have so much content and only 40 minutes. So when I wrote this presentation 17 years ago, I titled it "The End of Rails?" A very controversial, aggressive title. People said, "Hey man, Nick, you're such an asshole. You're always talking shit about Rails, and you're really like aggressive, and you're not contributing enough to be so like weird." So yeah, I agreed. I'm a little bit of an ass, so I renamed it to "The Illusion of Stable APIs." And the great thing about this is this could be anything, this talk, and it is some random stuff. But the problem was people started asking me, so actually what's your talk about? It's a cool title, but what is it about? And I did not manage to summarize my talk without saying Rails and something negative. So I decided to completely rename my talk, talking about the real stuff now. Also, I want to be a functional hipster, just giving you a little bit shit, Jose, sorry. So what I learned about rakia is it's pretty strong. It's good to heal inflammations. It makes people tweet weird photos in the weirdest hours of the day with toothbrushes, not with cats. It's a bit different. And it does not make you blind. That's a rumor that's not true. Right, Raphael? Can you still see me? Oh, yeah. What's also awesome about rakia is I don't know, I don't get hungover from it, so I could actually manage to party yesterday on the first night of the conference, by the way, not the second, before I give my closing talk and so on. And I managed to go and see the first talk. I mean, I woke up at like 9 or something and managed to take a selfie to prove you that I was in Jose's amazing Elixir talk. Every time I hear Jose talk about Elixir, I want to stop using Ruby and start using Elixir, but no, this is Ruby conference. Okay, enough bullshit. Let's talk about APIs. Many people in this room, I know exactly, think that I'm going to talk about document APIs. Yeah, how cool, JSON documents and Rails API and the active model serializer. Absolutely no. I'm going to talk about APIs as in what we use as programmers. Yeah, as a programmer, you use APIs on a daily basis. You create APIs when you write code. Okay, so I'm not going to talk about awesome JSON documents. I'm going to talk about stuff like constants can be part of an API, or methods can be part of an API, and the signature of, are you applauding me? That's really nice. The signature of the method arguments is part of the API, or an API can also be the structure of objects or functions and the workflows you use, so that's all parts of an API. And the cool thing about APIs is that they make my life, your life, not clapping anymore, and all of your lives excellent, because we can use stuff other people wrote, or we can write stuff for other people, and we don't have to really understand what's happening inside. It's pretty cool. Like you just, I don't know, like it's a bit like a power plug. You have internally it looks like this. I have no idea. I mean, I had physics in school, and I know there's like voltage and something else, and something kills you, and something does not kill you, and so on. It doesn't matter. I just use my power plug it into the socket, done. I have power, woohoo, and can recharge my iPhone that I not have. And so what APIs basically are for us it's an abstraction layer. Yeah, it abstracts away internal knowledge you need, or maybe you don't even have, from your task. So APIs are abstractions that help programmers and people who need to charge their iPhones, because you have to charge iPhones 5 times a day apparently, and you don't need to have knowledge about the internals. And the cool thing about APIs is they help, but what's even cooler is when people start to extend APIs and realize, hey, this is kind of cool what I've done, but actually I would love to add functionality on top of that. For example, it's a stupid example, but it's like, this is my talk, so there's lots of stupid examples. A login form is kind of an abstraction for authentication. Yeah, you authenticate yourself. This is my username, this is my password. And at some point, people said, hey, I had too much rakia in my life. I always forget my password. So let's allow logging in with Facebook or GitHub, because every person on this planet has GitHub, apparently. And so people started to add buttons to login forms where you just say, log me in as my GitHub whatever handle, and then you don't have to remember your password. So an excellent example of how APIs can be extended when it makes sense to extend them, yeah? So an API does not mean it has to stay like that for the rest of the time of this piece of software, and APIs are meant to be changed when it makes sense. This is my favorite part of the talk. Ruby on Rails. So, APIs come in gems, and APIs come in form of, I don't know, Ruby internals and all this kind of stuff. APIs also come in form of, for example, the Rails framework. Yes, now you have to say, oh no, he's going to talk about Rails now, not again. So Rails has this, has a lot of like helpers and you know the way active record works and all this kind of stuff. But one part of Rails API is the so-called, they call it MVC. Yeah. So the MVC pattern is basically the architectural abstraction to help you write web applications. And it's a bit like, I don't know really how it's supposed to work. Like the controller knows about the view, and the view gets rendered by the controller, and the model can be presented via the controller to the view and all this kind of stuff. And in Rails, they make it like super sweet. Like, I mean, look at this. Hi, I'm Action View, and I'm Action Controller, and I'm Active Record. It's sweet. It's really sweet. I love them. And they make it like look really simple and like, hey, it's so easy to write web applications because you have Action Controller and Action View, and it's really only a few steps to get I don't know, a block or a application running. So this is like a typical flow chart. You don't have to understand it. So it's like the controller assigns some variables that it gets from the model layer, from the sweet active record with classes. And then it sends that data to the view, and so on and so on and so on. And again, it's really like tiny and sweet, and it works. It's great. It's fantastic. People can learn how to write applications within, I would say, 10 minutes. Yeah. So you can. I've given a lot of lectures at Rails Girls, and it's fascinating to see people who have never written any code write a dynamic page in literally like an hour. But the problem is that we have this MVC pattern and we think it is perfect. Stop reading this. Because we have the so-called Rails doctrine, written by DHH himself, a fantastic guy. The Rails doctrine basically says, MVC, the way we do it in Rails, and you all do MVC because we have a doctrine, is the way we write software. Okay? Our abstractions, our APIs are perfect, and we write applications using MVC because the doctrine, yo. And some people disagree, including me, if you couldn't tell. Yeah, for example, there's Mike Perham, where he basically figures out, okay, some Ruby developers don't even realize they are writing Ruby. They think they're writing Rails, and it takes a couple of years for them to realize, Rails is only Ruby. Because Rails and the doctrine makes it really hard to understand where are the boundaries of the language to the framework, and are there maybe more layers I could use in my application instead of MVC only? So, because the problem is that we all use this beautiful MVC pattern, and we end up with really, really, really convoluted code. I don't want to say messy, because messy would be negative. And then in the end of the talk, everyone will say, you are so negative. So we have, what is this? This is a view, for example. So the views in Rails, if you use the standard MVC, you will have really big views with like lots of authentication, authorization logic, helpers, rendering 10 partials in a row, passing down locals, using instance variables from the controller that you might change on the way, and this kind of stuff. So it's super hard to write complex applications and complex views in Rails. And the same is with, what is that? That's a controller. The same happens in the controller because we only have the MVC. So you have authentication logic, authorization, polymorphic dispatches. You use the persistence layer in every different position of this code. You pass stuff, you change the incoming parameters, you validate stuff, you trigger callbacks, but it's super hard to follow what a Rails developer actually does in a Rails in a controller action. And the same in the model. I mean, it's like some people might think, yeah, you're a bad programmer. You don't know how to program, and that's true. I have no fucking idea how to program. But there is lots of smart people out there, and they still run into this problem. Like, we have massive models, and then, you know, again, there is like state machines and validations and callback logic, and callbacks getting triggered when you don't want them, and validations being run when you don't want them run, and this kind of stuff. And this is not the problem of because we are stupid. I mean, I'm stupid, but you're not. And so what I'm trying to say is, if you realize my abstractions are not enough anymore, you have to change your abstractions, yeah, your APIs. This is the job of any good software developer. And I do not understand why Rails is so slow in accepting that its obsession with MVC is taking us into the wrong direction, in my opinion. If you like massive controllers, massive views, and massive models, okay. And so I want to show you an example why this is hard to deal with and how you can easily change this with additional abstraction layers, okay? So we all love Active Record. I actually love Active Record without certain features. Who does not like Active Record? Good. Doctrine. So a typical thing to do is you have a user model, you have validations like the name can be only 20 characters, the email has to be email format, age has to be numerical, blah, 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 blah. So when I use user.create and I pass in some rubbish data, for example, the name is not right, boom, the validation says, hey, stop, that's not cool. And that's great to make sure that the incoming data is sane. That's a great feature. The problem is now, let's say I want to create a user when I'm as an admin user. Yeah, I'm the admin and I want to create a user and I want to bypass certain validations. For example, as an admin, I want to create a user and be able to give that user a name that is longer than 20 characters. Just because I'm an admin, I'm cool. By the way, what about my head? So I want to create a user with a longer name than 20 characters as an admin, only as an admin. The normal user should always have this validation. So what I actually want is the same as before, as a normal user, without the first validation. And in Rails, this is basically impossible because we focus on pushing all the validations into the model. Yeah. So what they did is, okay, this is a missing feature. Let's add ifs and else so you can like turn off and on validations depending on the context. Because we don't want to change our architecture. We don't want to change the API. We want to keep the model, have all the validations. Yeah. So ifs and else started to pop up in the model. And I mean, do we like ifs and else? We do not like ifs and else in our code. We like polymorphic code because it gets super hard to read and follow what is going on. Yeah. So every time you add ifs and else into, especially in a declarative DSL or API, you are probably doing something wrong structurally. But it's always easier to add something instead of changing stuff structurally. Rant over. So the problem is that we try to handle two different contexts in one class. Yeah? We want both different sets of validations in the user class. And I know that we have the validation context feature in Rails, but I also know that no one is using it. So the problem in this example is two contexts, creating a user as a normal user, creating a user as an admin, are handled in one class because we want those two contexts in one class because classes are bad. And I'm Elixir now, no Ruby. The way this is handled in other frameworks is surprisingly simple. For example, who has heard of Elixir and Phoenix? Phoenix is a fantastic framework. It's getting better by the day. So the way Phoenix handles this is very fascinating. So I mean, this is a lot of code. Don't go nuts. This is only this doesn't even matter what the code exactly does. But what they do is they have modules. Just say, what's the exact name of this asset? Modules, functions, whatever. So in this function, yeah, that is creating a user. They define, first of all, they define the incoming fields in a so-called schema. And then they have a change set, and this change set contains validations and typecasting and other features I'm going to talk about in a second per context, yeah? So in Phoenix, instead of having the code to create a user as a normal user and as an admin in one class or in one function, in Phoenix, you can simply have two functions, and those two functions can share validations, those two functions can use different typecastings, whatever, and those validations, those two functions or modules can be used depending on the context. When I'm logged in as an admin, I'm going to use a different function. And it is surprisingly simple how they solve this problem of I want to have two different sets of validations for different contexts. In a relatively young framework for Ruby, hey, we like Ruby, right? Woo! I know it's really late and everyone wants to go to the unofficial after party, me included. So, Trailblazer is a framework that works on top of existing frameworks like Hanami, Rails, Grape, Rhoda, and basically brings what we call high-level architecture into Ruby software development. Because I said we, you already know that I'm the author of it, so it's a shameless plug. In Trailblazer, this is basically identical to the way it works in Phoenix, and we did not copy stuff from each other. It's just common sense in object-oriented or in functional programming, yeah? So, again, don't freak out. This is only structural code. You don't have to understand all the implications. In Trailblazer, you have what we call operation, which is a class per context. So I have an operation to create a user as a normal user, and I have an operation to create a user as an admin. And what we have in Trailblazer is contracts. So in a contract, per operation, you define the incoming fields, exactly the way Phoenix does it, and you define the validations per context. So if I want to remove validations, I add a new operation with a new contract. And I can then use this validation in my operation, so the runtime code is not really relevant at this time. But the point here is exactly the same we had before. Yeah? Instead of trying to push everything into one class just because we want to keep MVC, like we can't change it. Instead of pushing this into one class, we have two different operations. They can share validations, they can share typecasting and all this kind of stuff, coercion, features. You will always be dry, but you don't have this problem of, I don't want this part of the code run when the context is like this. You just have two different objects for two different contexts. So it's really simple. It's like, why would I bother to push everything into one class and then disable afterwards instead of just having two separate classes to handle two different things? So what we do, or what many people do, is they rethink their APIs because they realized, hey, pushing everything into one class, for example, doesn't make sense. Let's do something else. And it is actually not that hard. And I don't know what's the problem with having two classes instead of one. Some people think, oh, wait, oh, God, are you crazy? Classes, objects. If you use objects, it's going to be slower because the garbage collection. And what objects to do one thing only and not 15 things at once? That's like, what's wrong with you? And then relax. It's really simple. Just relax. So using objects is not expensive because every time you use a string or a symbol or a hash or you do a hash merge, an object is created as well. So it doesn't matter if you create a hash or if you create an operation to create a user. it is really cheap in Ruby, and that's because we have really smart people working on that kind of stuff. Well, he's not paying attention. Another example of this obsession of we have to have everything in one class because is the old feature, it's gone now, attr accessible. So attr accessible, I don't know if I have an example. Yes, attr accessible allowed you to define, if I create a user, I only want to respect name, email, and age. Everything else that is coming in should be ignored. Okay? So it's basically not a validation, it's more like a filter. And again, it was like, where do we put this? Into the model, of course, because fat model, skinny controller. So we could say, if I create a user, just ignore everything but name, email, and age. But only when you're a normal user. When I'm an admin, I want to have all kinds of fields allowed because I'm an admin. How does this work in Rails? It is impossible again. Gesundheit. So what they did, and that was actually the right thing to do, yes, I can also talk positively about good stuff, about okay stuff. They introduced strong parameters at some point because they figured out, hey, we cannot handle two contexts with one declaration in one model. We should have one declaration per context. And then they introduced strong parameters, written by our doctrine writer and highly inspiring individual, David Hennemann Hansen. So that was a good thing, because now you can have access control, or the filtering as I called it, per context. The problem was, or is, that this code sits in the controller. So now what happens is you have some validation code and some filtering code in your model, and you have some validation code and filtering code, for example, strong parameters, in the controller. And again, I do not understand what is the problem to just introduce a third layer, validation, for example, that contains both parts, because it's both validation relevant. And that is, again, exactly what Phoenix and Trailblazer do. Okay? Look at this beautiful logo. Take a deep breath. Here we go. So, in this function, or whatever we called it, module, Jose is apparently not here. I'm really, really, really angry. Ah, here he is. So it's a function. Do you also call it function in Phoenix? Like, or is it like, does it have a special name? Okay, it's a function. A function. So in this function, to create a user, they have this cast function where they can say, I'm only interested in the name and the email per context, because I'm going to use this function only as a non-admin user, okay? And it's exactly the same in Trailblazer. So instead of having it sitting in some random place, we have the properties defined in our contract, and the contract is per operation. So I use this operation as a non-admin, and I use another operation with different fields for an admin context, for example. So I don't have to deactivate features that I already initially added for a special case. I handle all my special cases with different classes or functions. It is so simple, and I really struggle to understand why we make our lives miserably hard by forcing like people to push everything into MVC, even though what we do is not MVC. Yeah. So a validation is not model dependent, and is also not controller dependent. So why don't we have a layer for validations? Yeah. And the funny thing is that lots of existing or new frameworks completely go into the direction of let's have one object per context. Let's have one object to do one thing, validation. And in Rails, we still have this, okay, my access control is in strong parameters, which is awesome because it's a separate object. It's actually cool, but it's, in my opinion, in the wrong place. And my validation of the parameters, once they're filtered, happens in the model. And I might also do some like manual validation, for example, if there is a current user I have to check something against, I might do that in the controller, because in the controller it's easier to access the current user. And it is really hard to understand what validation code is run in this context or in this context. And this is not because the validation code is wrong or anything. It is because we don't have the right abstraction layers. Yeah? We try to work with an outdated, I don't want to say fundamentally flawed, but flawed design of objects. And a lovely example how APIs and flaws were picked up by smart people is the brand new, is it 2.3? The brand new lonely operator, also known as Keanu Reeves operator, which has the following behavior. So you often have this case that you want to access a really, really deeply nested property of some nested object graph, breaking the law of Demeter 100,000 times, but it doesn't matter. And you always have to check, like, is the profile there? Yes. Then is the thumbnail there? Yes. Is the la? So this is actually code from the Rails guides. And this is really awkward, and you have to like go through, like it's super convoluted code to go to just to get some thumbnail URL or something, yeah? So, but you have this a lot because it could always be nil, and you don't want to access nil because then you get the nil exception, and we don't have monads in Ruby yet. So, yeah. So what they did was they introduced try in active support a few years ago. And try basically allows you to go through that chain. I think you have all used try. Actually, if you use try, you're doing it wrong. But you have this chain, and you can write this chain in one line instead of in 7 lines. And it will help you, if there's nil, it won't continue the execution chain, which is actually pretty cool. So people saw, hey, this is really awkward in my existing API, because we don't have an API for this case. Let's introduce try. And what's even cooler is that then Ruby in 2.3, it was 2.3, right? They introduced an operator to do that kind of stuff. So you don't even have to think about, am I using active support or not? Because I don't really use it. Sorry, I said stop the ranting. So they introduced an entire operator to handle this special awkward case of is it nil or not? And that's pretty fantastic, because it is the job, as I said earlier, of a good software developer to pick up, here's a problem with my abstractions, my API is not entirely nice to use, let's change it. And that's exactly what happened with the Keanu Reeves, the safe navigation operator, where the Ruby core team introduced a way to treat execution chains and the bad nil object that might be emitted in somewhere in this chain. I wish we had more operators like this, but who knows? Ruby 3.0 coming in, when was it? December 2025 is coming, and I'm sure it's going to be packed with useful features. The Keanu Reeves operator, when it appeared, I was happy because I love it when people add and extend their APIs for the sake of better code. But I also was a little bit sad because it is it's another story to talk about, is this actually good code, to have those long chains of responsibility in your code. And I can already see how lots of people jump on this feature and say, yes, let's use the lonely operator, and we will save 10 lines of code. And then they upgrade to Ruby 2.3, which is good. And they will think, my code is awesome now because I'm using the lonely operator. So one eye happy, laughing, one eye a little bit sad, because it actually is also a kind of dangerous tool, because it might create the illusion your code is now perfect. But if you have 5-level deep chains to access objects, you might have to rethink your structure. Anyway, I'm not here to talk about, actually I am here to talk about structures, whatever. A last feature I want to have is, or a problem that is crying for a feature, is a new keyword or a new keyword I'm suggesting, proposing, whatever. So when you use namespacing in Ruby, who likes to use namespacing in Ruby? Excellent, this is an awesome audience, because namespacing is great. Let's say you have a class defined in one file, user.rb, and it's a user class, and it is derived from active record base. That is totally fine. In another file, for example, lib user create.rb, I want to namespace the create class into user. Yeah, this is how namespacing in Ruby works. So there's different kinds of tricks and different kinds of tricks how to avoid the problem I'm going to talk about, but it's all kind of has its benefits and trade-offs. So if you use this way of namespacing, you as excellent programmers instantly see, hey, there is redundancy, because I have this and this twice. And if I forget to add this, for example, in the upper file, Ruby will say, hey, stop, here is a superclass mismatch. If I forget it in this case, Ruby won't say anything, and it will work, because that's apparently a feature. I was asking about that yesterday I was asking Mats, he said it's a feature, that's great. If I load this file first without this, then this file will break, and because Ruby doesn't know, is it an active record base, or is it not? Is it just a normal Ruby class? So it is, no matter how you turn it, you always run into this problem when you namespace. You have to be really careful with loading order, and you have to be really careful with using the same inheritance. So basically, you have to be redundant to satisfy Ruby, which is cool, because I don't want to have classes with multiple inheritance. But actually, I don't want to think about this kind of stuff. I just want to say something like, hey, what if in the second file I just say namespace user, and Ruby will find out, you mean the top level user class that is derived from active record base. But in the second file that is loaded, I don't care about this, because I just say, Ruby, I want this user constant. Can you please give that to me and nest the new create class into that namespace? And this feature is not existent, in case you didn't know. There's no namespace keyword, even though I made it orange on the screen, because I just marked the word namespace and clicked font color orange. So this feature is not existent yet. But apparently it is already approved by the EuRuKo team. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is the way to do open source. You just tell people what to do, and they do it, and in the end you can say, oh, I did that, I invented that. By the way, I'm waiting for, where's my, there should be someone with a 5 minutes sheet of paper, but no one warned me. My professional timer here warned me, so what's going on here? What? You all love me. It's gonna be such a good party tonight. So I did try to show you some examples when abstractions start leaking, and I also did try to show you how to solve that. And usually this implies more than just, oh, I'm going to allow another argument in my method, or I'm going to change a method name. This is cosmetical changes. They do not help. What you have to change is the structure of your code, yeah? Usually it's the structure. So it's not about method names and method arguments. It's about what object has this method, yeah? And this is the hard part in software development, is architecture. And there's no book to tell you how to find out. I mean, there's books how to find out how to when something is wrong. Martin Fowler, Refactoring, an awesome book. I gave it to a friend, and he still has it. So I only read half of it. So it's a great book to find out those kind of to learn how to find out about those kind of problems. But there's no book to tell you, here is how you solve this problem, and here's how you solve this problem. Because you can read 100 books about design patterns, they won't tell you how to solve your exact problem. But what you have to keep in mind when you encounter those kind of code smells and problems, that it's your job to think about a new API. It's your job, and it's also a lot of fun to play with new architectural changes and to make sure that the new API will probably solve stuff that might appear in the future, because a good developer also thinks about what can happen in the future, even though we can't see what happens in the future. Okay, so changing APIs is not wrong. It's not like, oh, I wrote shit code, I have to change my API, I'm a horrible developer. It means you're a good developer, yeah? Always think of this login form where they suddenly said, hey, our abstraction of email and password, I know it's a horrible example, but it doesn't matter, is not enough. Let's add some new functionality to log in with GitHub. That was awesome. It made everyone's life easier. I don't have to remember my passwords anymore. I can drink more rakia. And it still works, okay? So when you change your APIs and your structure, you're doing it actually right. And there's a couple of simple tricks you will learn automatically. For example, the simpler your objects, the less responsibility an object has. We had some excellent talks about this at this amazing conference, which has the after party on the first day, not the second day. There's some. The simpler you design your new API, the more likely you are on the right path, okay? But changing stuff is not wrong. And I hope that also existing huge APIs as found in Rails will slowly pick up this idea of, hey, maybe it's not okay to work with a 10-year-old flawed MVC paradigm, and instead of adding new features, which is awesome, and I totally respect the work of the Rails core team, but I would hope that new structural ideas and new architectural changes will be accepted faster than 10 years to change something. And so the last thing I want to give you on your way before we all meet at the Vitamin B after party is that if you change your APIs, you're being innovative, and that is great. So you want innovation, you want to solve problems instead of just ignoring them or just having some duct tape fix for this kind of stuff. You want to innovate your own code, and that can only happen with change and not with looking at your code and saying, oh, I'm such an awesome programmer. Actually, I do that all the time. So the last thing you should know is I really like sunsets. And thank you, you were an amazing audience. And now let's go to Vitamin B. Woo!